Hey, welcome to the Black Knight Nation podcast. I'm your host, Sal Interdonato. The Black Knight Nation podcast is sponsored by Higher Echelon. Higher Echelon is a trusted partner. It's ran by Joe Ross, former Army fullback, former Army assistant coach, former guest on the Black Knight Nation podcast. We thank Higher Echelon for sponsoring this podcast. And we have Ray Stith joining us, former Army cornerback. Ray, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
No, but thank you for having me, Sal. I'm honored to be here. I'm sure it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, this is on the podcast. We really just kind of have the former Army players or athletes walk us through their journey to West Point, maybe their recruiting story, so to speak, together. And wondering if you might have a unique recruiting story, or how did your recruiting go with Army, and how did you end up at West Point?
Yeah, so great questions there. I don't know if my story is unique to anyone else, but I think it's pretty unique to me. So I was born and raised in Newport News, Virginia, down on the peninsula, the Tidewater area. And, I'm a little biased, but I think we play pretty good football down there on the peninsula, in the Peninsula District in Virginia. And so played football, from the time I was 7 all the way through high school. Wasn't a very big guy. I'm still not a very big guy, to be honest with you, but wasn't a very big guy coming out of high school. I think I weighed all of 145 pounds my senior year of high school. And I was recruited, pretty well, as defensive back, as a receiver, but not a lot of Division I, A offers, FBS as we call it now, used to be, Division I-A, and then we used to call, the other stuff, the FCS, we call it 1AA or whatever the case may be. So and had a few FCS offers, not a lot of FBS offers, but West Point was one of the, the FBS teams that recruited me. And so, to be completely honest, I was a pretty uninformed kid. When I got letters from West Point and it said Army on the top, my immediate response was, well, I'm not going to the Army. I'm going to college, so I don't need to read these letters, because I wasn't very informed about West Point or the Army football team. And sure enough, my parents kind of got me to take a look and do my research, if you will. And I found out a little bit more about West Point. Watched the Army-Navy game in 2001 of my senior year, which was the last one that Army won prior to the 14-year streak. And I got a better sense of what West Point was all about. So I went on my visit. My dad's former Marine. My mom and dad went on that visit with me, and my parents fell in love with the campus, fell in love with the culture, fell in love with what West Point could bring me after graduation. And me being a 18-year-old kid who just wanted to play football. At the time, Todd Berry was the head coach, and he told me, unlike a lot of these other schools, hey, if you're good enough to compete as a freshman, you'll compete as a freshman and you'll get to play if you're good enough to play. Whereas everybody else was telling me, hey, you're kind of small. Let's get you in the weight room, get you beefed up a little bit, and give you a chance to play after a redshirt season. So all those factors, parents loving it, great future, opportunity to go compete to play as a freshman, and then not having a lot of knowledge as to what else was coming. It was a decision that I'm glad I made.
Yeah, when you go into that, right, you take your visit and you see what West Point, a lot of even recruits today are really impressed. Now, I mean, the facilities are now, I mean, where a lot of Power 5 programs are. I had a recruit visit the recent class and said, hey, there's not much difference between this and like a Power 5 school as far as facilities wise. But then you get into the whole, like, okay, now it's not just football at West Point, right? And then you get into like your experiences at like Beast Barracks and what's that? I mean, that's kind of an awakening a little bit, I imagine. Was that, I mean, even though your father was a Marine, was that a little bit of awakening for you, what Beast was all about? And did that kind of get, was that like a start for you, so to speak, a reality or something? Or
Yeah, you know, as I said, going into it, I was pretty ignorant to the entire experience of West Point. I didn't have a family member or anyone who had gone through it. I didn't have any friends or, you know, guys and girls that I maybe played with or graduated with in high school that had gone to West Point. And so, in a way, in my world at least, I was kind of the first person to go through that experience. So, didn't know what to expect. And you're right, Beast was it was a bit of a wake up call. Not I didn't know what to expect, and I'm glad I didn't have expectations because uh, I probably would have thought differently about it. You know, going in with expectations. I do remember in Beast Barracks. You know, for me, life has always been about making a decision. You know, I believe that when you make a decision, you stick with that decision until it becomes either dangerous or unhealthy for you to continue going down that path. And unhealthy can be mental, you know, it doesn't have to be physically unhealthy. But if you get to a point where the decision you made is starting to put you or your loved one in danger, it's affecting you from a health standpoint, mentally, physically, it's probably time to change that decision. And so when I'm when I remember the first Sunday we had at Beast, and you know, it's been a week of these new experiences and people yelling at me and telling me what to do, and it was unexpected. And we had church service that Sunday, and never been an overly religious guy, but you know, did attend church and growing up, and so we had the church service. I kind of had a moment, and I remember looking out over Trophy Point. It's a nice sunny day. You got the Hudson in the background. The pastor at the time sounded like a Charlie Brown teacher. You know, nothing's going on registering in my head because I'm just in my own world. And I probably shed a tear or two during that time. You know, not really because I was upset, not because I was hurting, but you know, just the emotion I was going through. And I think after that, I made that decision. Like, you know what? I'm here. This is it. This is what I decided to do. This is what we're going to do. And I think after that day, West Point was never easy. Not Beast, you know, the academic schedule, football, nothing was easy there. But after that day, after making that decision, it got a lot easier, if you will, because mentally I committed to doing what it takes to, you know, to make it out of that situation.
yeah, I mean, at West Point, right? Some football players or some cadets might see maybe the first year, the second year, and until they go to class that first day junior year in the firm, it's just they still might have some questions, but for you to have that right there and there, here, this is my home, this is where I'm going to stay, this is where I'm going to put in the work in football, here's where I'm going to put in the work academically, and during the military training stuff too, that says a lot. What was freshman football year like for you? I mean, did you get a chance right away to make a mark? And how did that go? Your first say camp, so to speak, because you're coming out of Beast, right? So I don't know how that affected you, because sometime back then you were coming like a couple days out, and you were going right. You weren't getting like the summer to take classes or anything like that, right? I mean, you were coming right from Beast, so.
Yeah, I remember. You know, we had the march back. Well, I didn't take that back. We had our I forget what the exercise was called, but our 24-hour operations exercise that we had at the end of Beast. And after that, the football players kind of left and we went to football camp. And like you said, it was, you finish your mission at 7 a.m., ate some breakfast, and, probably by 10 a.m., you were, on the back of the truck heading back to West Point to start football camp, so there wasn't a break. Mentally, I guess it was a break because you were going to go do something you love, but there was no physical break whatsoever. But freshman year was good. I came in recruited as a defensive back, but I played quite a bit of receiver in high school too. And so I think freshman camp, before the upperclassmen arrived, We were just there. I kind of got to try out on both sides of the ball, if you will. They had me playing receiver, and then they had me playing defensive back. And ultimately, I like to say I made the decision to play defensive back. The guys who play receiver will always say the defensive backs are only defensive backs because they can't catch. I can catch the football, but I like to think that I don't like to get hit. So I, ended up moving over defensive back and played in a few games at defensive back in my freshman year. Played a lot of special teams and pretty much played every single game on special teams until I broke my wrist probably halfway through the year as a freshman. And then I had surgery, and the rest of the year, probably like the last 3 or 4 games, I didn't play because I had a cast on my left wrist.
I remember what that first college game experience was like for you. Do you still have memories of that game of when you were able to put on the Black Knights uniform and run out to the field and that experience, what that was like?
Oh, it was like nothing I ever felt, nothing I ever experienced before in my life. That game, I think we played Holy Cross our first game, and it was a home game. And, the opening day at Mikey Stadium is always a big deal. Generally speaking, the weather's pretty good. The fans are super excited, for the thought of a new season. And the crowd at Mikey's always great, regardless of whether there's 20,000 people in there or 30,000 people in there. You're always going to get, a good atmosphere. So I never played in front of that many fans ever, and that was nice. We didn't win that game. We should have, but we didn't win that game my freshman year. And so that part was not great, but just running out in the field, having the fans go crazy, hearing the music, hearing the cannons go off, all that was just amazing. It was, probably one of the most eye-opening, experiences I ever had in college, aside from Army Navy, obviously.
I remember watching games and toward after your freshman year and watching you play corner at Army, and there was definitely you were a physical guy, right? Playing corner, you were a very aggressive guy, and just when I guess the freshman year doesn't end the way you want it to. But what do you think kind of turned the corner for you at West Point to where, hey, you were competing for a starting spot and you were getting into games and then you were able to, contribute on defense and make plays and that kind of stuff? When do you think that kind of happened for you?
Yeah, for sure. After the off season, after freshman year, that off season, I'm not sure how much I weighed going into the off season. I know I probably played around 100, somewhere between 155 and 160 pounds my freshman year. And I think I probably gained 10 or 15 pounds going into my sophomore year. And I think even though that's still not very big at all, I think the difference in size gave me a little bit more confidence. Getting on a strength program like we had at West Point made me faster, which gave me a lot more confidence. And then honestly, I think the biggest confidence booster for me was the special teams play I had as a sophomore, returning kicks, because that was the first. You play DB, you make some tackles, you defend some passes, you run around a lot, but you're not in the spotlight unless the ball's coming your way. Whereas if you're a kick returner, every time they kick the ball, if the spotlight's on you. And so I remember my sophomore year, first game of the season, I had a couple of really good punt returns, one of which went back for a touchdown. And I think that game shifted, my confidence moving forward for the rest of my career, honestly.
Yeah, no doubt. So this past season we had Tyrell Robinson return a punt for a touchdown, and it was the first time since 2007 that it happened. So
Corey
that
Anderson
wasn't
in the
something.
2007 one.
Yeah, so I mean, for you to do it in that first game of early in your sophomore season definitely had to be a boost, right? And it definitely like a confidence that you said. And I know that back then, the wins are not coming as much as the team would hope and stuff like that. And I'm just wondering, like, how how you keep it going, so to speak, and get out there every day, every practice, every game. And the Army team is noted for the toughness, right? Strength, toughness, and just not flinching. And so I wonder, like, how does that progress, like your sophomore and junior years, where hey, the results might not be there, but you're still trying to do your best to get the team that victory.
Yeah, I mean that was probably the toughest part of being on the football team. Because to your point, we didn't win very much when I was there. My senior year, my team captain year was the best season we had, both in the win column and in terms of the way we competed. Since my entire career there, but it was tough junior year and sophomore year with all the losses. But I will tell you, I would think there was two things that really helped both of those seasons. I think the first was, uh, the team captains. You got guys out there who are really good leaders, and they motivate, and they lead not only by what they say, but also what they do. And when you see a guy go out there and give everything he's got every single game, and you know that he's bought in, and he's your leader, you want to do the same thing. And then also, everybody talks about the brotherhood, and it's a real thing. You can't line up next to these guys every day, for your entire football career and not care about them and not want to make sure that you're doing everything possible to do what's best for the team. So I think those two factors come into play when the season isn't going the way you want to. You look at the man next to you and you realize, like, I can't not give my all, regardless of what the results are. I got to come out there every day and do what I need to do, and to try to win this football game and try to make this team as good as we can be.
No doubt. I want a couple questions for you. One, I try to ask this to all former Army football players because, I think especially back then, right? It was a Conference USA schedule that you played in, right? And just wondering who might have been the best player you went up against when you were at Army. Who might have been a guy that you might have had to go up against? You're shaking your head, so maybe you have an answer off the top of your head. So,
I mean, you get what? I guess the question would be me personally up against, or just guys we played against. I mean, we played against some really good football players. I off the top of my head, some of the guys that went to the NFL. Roddy White went to UAB, played against him. Played against Matthias Kiwanuka up at Boston College my senior year. Played against Michael Bush at Louisville. LaFleur was quarterback at Louisville. Shelton was a running back at Louisville. They had a great squad there. Who else did we play against? I think Dan Orlovsky played at UConn while I was at West Point, if I'm not mistaken. There
I
were
thought a
so
former
many.
guest said. Yeah, I thought a former guest said that you might have played against Chris Johnson at East Carolina. Does that ring a bell or no?
I think Chris Johnson might have been a little. I'm not sure if we played against Chris Johnson, but we did play against D'Angelo Williams at Memphis,
Yeah.
and we did play against Matt Forte at Tulane. So there were some guys who became, depending on what team you root for in the NFL, they became household names, not Hall of Fames or anything, but definitely guys who you would know if that was your favorite team that I lined up against on Saturdays during my time. And it was pretty good guys.
Yeah, I mean, Conference USA back then, I mean, it had a lot of I mean, had a lot of good offensive talent. Every team had probably a couple guys that were going to get their shot in the NFL. And with an independent schedule now with Army, they got the Power Five team on the schedule here and there, and they see some pretty talented players. But that on a week by week basis, I mean, you're going against somebody that had a legitimate NFL career. I mean,
Yeah.
that's yeah, that's pretty impressive. What
You
do you
bring that
think your
up. I was gonna say, so you bring that up, and one of the things that I remember, and we have to look back at the actual rankings at the time, but my senior year, we lost, I think, our first 5 or 6 games, and out of those games, I think 3 of the teams we played were top 25 teams in the country. So you talk about a tough schedule. Now, granted, that wasn't a Conference USA schedule. That was, or maybe it was, that was my senior year. So it was. I mean, it was tough. It was tough lining up every Saturday, especially early in the season when as a team, you're trying to figure out how to gel. You need a couple of opportunities to play against some folks that are on your level. And when you play against top 25 teams every other Saturday, that's tough to do.
yeah? I mean, yeah, it. I can't imagine like starting the season out like that, right? And then you guys still found a way to, like you said, that um, captains, step up and you find a way to get through that. And there's going to be guys banged up from those games, right? There's going to be guys that are, no team is healthy after the first game, but you find a way to get on the field and make a difference. And you guys were able to. Do you think you finished? I mean, were you satisfied with the way kind of you guys finished strong your senior year, or finished the way you did, or just the way you kind of fought through that start and got made something positive out of it, or
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think, being the team captain that year, just watching the team go on the run we went on and competing at the level we competed at, it was good. Obviously, still not the results we want. We didn't make a bowl game. Didn't beat Navy. Did beat Air Force for the first time at Air Force in a couple of decades, which was really cool. Um, but we didn't get to the ultimate prize, which obviously beating Navy, and going to a bowl game and winning a bowl game is what you want to do at the end of every season. And we didn't get there, but we gave ourselves the best chance that I had my entire 4 years there, which was really good. I was proud to be a captain of that team. Wish the results were a little bit better, but to your point, to fight like the team did, especially after starting the season, with a bunch of losses, we could have easily said, just a repeat of the previous seasons, or here we go again. But the team didn't do that. Team kept fighting, and like I said, gave ourselves a chance.
yeah, we remember the Army teams, right, that have the 96 team and the teams recent with the 10 and 11 wins and stuff like that. But sometimes those teams that kind of maybe didn't get to that ultimate goal, there's still some good stories within those teams, right? And how they persevered and stuff like that. Do you have a memory to senior season that sticks out, like, or because I was going to ask you what your best experience as an Army football player is, but maybe do you have a memory um your senior year that really stands out about, hey, this is what the brotherhood's all about, and the like?
Yeah, I think it's crazy to say, but when you come from playing football from the time you're 7 years old, like I did, through the age of 21, you have quite a few winning seasons. And one of the things and it's silly to say this, but one of the things I thought was so cool as a little kid, watching the high school team and then being a high school player, and you have the little kids on the sideline, is when you're winning a football game and you're a starter, and you got to let some of the reserves play in the fourth quarter because you're winning. You don't want, you want to get people experience. You don't want to get people hurt. And so throughout my entire West Point career, I'm not sure I can remember a game where we were winning so well that the seniors or the starters got to sit out because we were up. Now there were some games where the starters came out because we were losing so badly, but never one where we were winning so much that they let the reserves play. And so I think one of the coolest memories for me is senior day. Um, as a senior, I got to experience the same thing I got to experience in high school, where I was a senior, I was a starter, and we were winning by a large enough margin to where I got to, be on the sideline and waving at the little kids in the stands and throwing my gloves and wristbands up while the reserves got some playing time, and then being carried off the field as a senior after winning, a football game in Mikey Stadium. The last one we had in Mikey Stadium as seniors was really cool.
Yeah, no doubt. I'll ask you this about being voted the captain, just the honor that was, because I don't know how that worked when you played. Now it's the team votes. I don't know if the coaches voted you the captain, but can you talk about that? About the honor of being the captain your senior year?
Yeah, it was a team vote back then too, and it was something that honestly that was never a goal of mine to be a team captain. I always just wanted to do my part and make sure that if I was called upon by the team, then I was doing what they needed me to do in that moment to help us win. And so it was a bit of a surprise to be voted as team captain. I considered myself a leader, but I didn't think I was any more of a leader than anyone else, in that room. But big honor for the team to vote me as team captain. We had 2 on defense and 2 on offense, all of which are still really good friends of mine to this day. So, I think more than anything, the thing that stuck with me most about being voted the team captain is that I didn't do, in my opinion, I didn't do anything that was trying to rally anybody to vote for me. In fact, like I said, I don't necessarily had a goal. I didn't necessarily have a goal to be a team captain. It's just something that my teammates thought I deserved. So that was pretty cool. That was a pretty cool feeling.
Yeah, the last game you guys played at Mikey Stadium your senior year was against Arkansas State, and that was I was just checking out that 2005 schedule. Yeah, that was like you said, that was that was a lot. That was a lot. So you said we were talking before the podcast. Then after your football, your playing career is over. You're GA at the academy for the 2006 season, and talk to me a little bit about what transitioning to the Army was like for you after that, and your experiences there.
Yeah, transition to the Army after being a grad assistant was pretty smooth. I think one of the things I learned after leaving West Point is if you have no experience, with military families, specifically Army families, growing up, you get a sense that West Point and what we call the real Army are the same, and they're not. Prime example at West Point, you see majors and lieutenant colonels, walking around all the time. You see full bird colonels, you see, generals, on a daily basis. And while you have a lot of respect for, all those men and women walking around who've earned that rank, it becomes sort of normal at West Point to see a lieutenant colonel. It becomes normal to see a full bird colonel walking around. It becomes normal to see a general, on a weekly basis. You get out to the real Army, that rank carries a whole lot more weight than it does at West Point because there are a lot less, field grade officers within each unit. And then also, you get your own sort of freedom, if you will. You get to live your life. You're an adult. And the Army still is your career. You still have to do what's necessary to be successful. But you can have your own hobbies. You can have your own things that you enjoy on the weekends. You can, you can do whatever you want to do after work. And, things like that were a surprise the transition was great. The transition was, I mean, being a platoon leader to me was the best job I ever had in the Army. You get to be with your guys and girls every day, um, whether it's back stateside or deployed. You get to do what you signed up to do every single day. As I like to call it, you get to be GI Joe, which is what I signed up to do. And so I loved it. I love making that transition. I love, what came with it. I love being a platoon leader. It was all great. It was all great going from GA, to Bolic, and then finally making it to my first unit, probably about 7 months later.
Did you, in your time of service, did you have any run-ins with Did you work with any Army football players? A lot of times on the podcast, we hear, "Hey, I served with this guy who was, either my teammate or who I knew, or who might have been 10 years back in the Army football, that you had to work closely with." Did you get any tours overseas in those situations or no?
So oddly enough, I'm not sure that I ran into. I don't know that I had any Army football players that were in my direct chain of command while I was in the Army. But in terms of just people in my unit, I remember my first unit my first time as a battery commander. Jake Murphy, who was a teammate of mine, was a battery commander in the same battalion as me. Within my unit, my actual battery, I had 2 Army football players as lieutenants under me in my battery. When we first got to Fort Hood, we had a flag football team that was comprised of probably 5 or 6 former Army football players on the same flag football team, plus a few other Corps Sport athletes, a couple soccer players, baseball players, all playing flag football together. So, and then, going to Afghanistan, running into a few of my former teammates while in Afghanistan, being stationed at Fort Hood, which is one of the biggest posts, running into a couple of former teammates at Fort Hood, same out of Fort Bliss, which was my first duty station. Ran into quite a few football players at Fort Bliss, or former football players. So I experienced a lot of interactions with former Army football players while I was out there. Nobody was ever my boss, but a lot of people worked side by side with me.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, but one more question about service. You know, that what is what's that? How you or somewhere out there in Afghanistan?
I'm sorry, Si, you broke up a little bit on me there. Can you repeat that one more time?
Just wondering, what when you're in Afghanistan, you're serving in Afghanistan, how did as an Army football player kind of might have helped you through that time? I don't know where you were, what the situation was, but still you're overseas and it could be hostile. So.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I go back to 2 things. I think not quite the same in terms of the emotions, but similar to my initial decision at West Point. So I'll paint a picture for you. So my deployment to Afghanistan. At the time, I was single. I'm married with 2 children now. But in 2007, when I deployed, I was single with no kids. We left El Paso on Christmas night, and we ended up in Afghanistan, and we landed at Bagram Airfield on December 31st at about 5 in the morning. It was still dark outside. So just for perspective, we left on Christmas night. December 31st is my birthday. So I left the U.S. on Christmas night and landed in the war zone first thing in the morning on my birthday. Uh, so you can imagine what's going through my head mentally in terms of, being at war there. As I said, similar to my time at West Point. You land in Afghanistan. It's much like in terms of just the atmosphere, weather at least. Uh, it's similar to West Point in that it's gray and it's cold. Where we were in Pawan province in Afghanistan, and so you go through a mental exercise of all the things that you go through. And I had a similar moment where just kind of mind my own business, thinking about things, and it's like, all right, you're not going home. You're here. And you don't have a choice. Like, let's be a man about it and do what we have to do. And so, making that decision, once again, deployment wasn't easy, but it was much easier once I made the decision that this is where we're going to go. And like I said, it was an easy decision because I didn't really have a choice. It's not like West Point where I could have raised my hand and said, I'm done here. You can't really do that when you deploy. So, and then in terms of lessons and takeaways from being a West Point football player, as I said, my time as a platoon leader was the best ever, and I was platoon leader when I was deployed. And so, it's like being with the guys, on the team. You have that bond, you have that family atmosphere, and you're willing to do whatever it takes, for the man or woman next to you. And when you're a leader, that carries a little bit more weight and you have a little bit more responsibility, which I really, I really harnessed that and was proud to have that responsibility placed on me. And so, similar to being the team captain on the West Point team, I kind of looked at it as my responsibility to not only lead these individuals in terms of on missions and getting us where we need to be, but also establishing the mentality that, we were going to be good and we're going to keep on doing, regardless of the outcome, we're going to keep on doing things we got to do to try to be successful every day. And thankfully, we took all those men and women over there and brought all of them back home. So that's always a plus.
Wow. Great story. Really appreciate you sharing. Just want to one more question. Just want to ask you, what you're up to now. I know you're working with higher echelon. Just talk about the transition to the business, business world after the military, and what you're up to now.
Yeah, so I'm working with higher echelon now. I lead the HR function for higher echelon. Joe brought me onto the team a little over a year ago now, and so I've been with the company a little bit over a year. Prior to that, I spent 10 years with another company, moving around in a couple different places, whether it's operations or the commercial side of the business or HR. I've done a little bit of everything there. The military was great in terms of, I think what people that go to West Point and serve in the military, I think a lot of times, especially Army football players, I think sometimes we take for granted, what that experience does to you when it comes to, your emotional capacity, I would say. I think a lot of us, whether it's from West Point, whether it's from playing sports, whether it's from being in the military, whether it's from being deployed, maybe it's a mixture of all of it. I think you build up a level of mental fortitude that you take for granted sometimes. And what all of those things combined has helped me to do is to realize that, 9 times out of 10 in the business sector, it can wait. If it doesn't happen today, unlike the military, most of the time, no one's going to lose their life. And so approaching everything with the mentality of we're going to get the job done. We're going to do everything we can to make sure we accomplish the mission, but also realizing that there's no need for you to put yourself into a bad state on something that can be completed tomorrow has really helped me with my leadership in corporate America. A lot of my teams, I like to bring a sense of calm to the team. So they realize that, like, hey, If I'm not freaking out about it, you shouldn't either. And if you have any question as to whether or not this is a big deal, don't worry about it because I'll let you know. I'll let you know if it's a big deal or not. So I think that's the biggest piece of leaving, West Point and the military and having the experience as a football player that I brought with me. You got to make a lot of fast decisions as a DB out there. Don't have to make them as fast in the business world.
Yeah, I think it's pretty neat that you kind of higher echelon. It's kind of like the Army football brotherhood kind of reuniting with Joe Ross, yourself, Rick Roper. I'm sure I'm missing some guys, Juice too. I'm sure I'm missing a
Yeah,
bunch of other
Steve
guys
Spalding is
there.
on the team as well. You said Rick, uh, Joe, of course, Juice, Steve, myself. Um, those are all the former football players that are there. We have a few other West Point grads, but not all
Yeah,
football players.
gotcha. Hey, Ray, really appreciate you hopping on today, sharing your story with us. Great stuff. Guys, if you're any other podcasts you like to listen to, check out our YouTube channel. Man, we have a lot of spring footballs in gear right now for Army, and we have a lot of videos up there. We have a new video with Noah Short up there by Lynn Fern, practice video. Booby Law is up there too. We just a lot of football player videos from practice. They're short, but they're right to the point about what's going on with the offense. And check out, like I said, check out our YouTube channel for podcasts like this. Give us a subscribe, give us a thumbs up. Check us out on the podcast platforms too, on Apple. We're all over the place, Apple, Spotify, and Ray. We really appreciate you popping on, and look forward to doing this again soon. And thanks so much.
Thank you, Sal. I really appreciate it. And obviously, I can't leave this podcast without saying beat Navy. We got to make sure we beat Navy again this year.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
All right, you too.